Hello, everybody. Welcome into the SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Evan Grant and David Moore. Fellas, how we doing this fine morning?
Good. Just bundled up here in my little Patagonia top. Feels good.
Mr. Patagonia. Got a little Patagonia stuff myself. Evan, how about you?
I'm terrible.
There? You're terrible?
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay, let's move on.
Well,
What's wrong, buddy?
we're dealing with some plumbing issues at my mother-in-law's home.
Yeah, we got that call for the plumber.
It's tough to navigate. It really is. The plumbing thing, like I'm talking to these guys and they're explaining stuff and I'm like, yeah, you could be talking to a wall right now. I have no idea what you're talking about with loops and manifolds and slab leaks and reroutes. Yeah, you're beyond me.
Yeah. Well, that's all. They're just making all of that up as they're talking to you.
That's kind of what it sounded like.
Oh, man.
All I know is it's going to cost me, or it's going to cost her and probably us a chunk of change.
Yeah. Well, and the great thing about it is you get all that done and you can't tell that anything happened.
Correct.
You know, it's okay.
Except that she'll have hot water at that point in time.
Well, that would be good. Yeah. Hot water would be good. That'd be nice. Yeah.
Does the stove work? You can boil it on the stove and then.
Oh, I like that.
No,
yeah.
She had no hot water. We brought her over to the house. So she's over here.
That's what's really bothering you, that she's over there.
Tomorrow is we're getting the leak locator guy. He's apparently got he comes in with like the Ghostbusters outfit and he's got like high-tech microphones and he taps the walls to figure out exactly where the leak is. It should be fun.
To me, what you look for is where the water's coming from.
Does he have a divining rod? Do they still use that to find out?
I thought yesterday the plumber was going to say, well, this guy comes in with a stick and it's got a Y at the end and he just kind of pokes around. But no, they've got electromagnetic fields and high-tech microphones. And I think it beats the other option that the other plumber gave me of, yeah, we're just going to drill a bunch of holes in the wall and hopefully we'll find it.
Yeah.
Maybe not,
good.
fella.
That sounds good.
At Texas Capital, we know that the path to greatness isn't for the faint of heart. It's full of chances and opportunities with no promises. We know because we help clients and communities achieve greatness every day. Texas Capital is a full-service financial services firm founded and headquartered in Dallas, Texas. Our customized solutions were built to keep your business moving forward. Please visit texascapital.com to learn more. That's texascapital.com. Texas Capital is the collective brand name for the Texas Capital Bank and its separate non-affiliate banks and wholly owned subsidiaries. For deposit products, member FDIC.
Okay, on that plumbing note, we're going to move on now to see what's going on with what's leaking with the Cowboys.
Speaking of down the drain.
Yeah, there you go.
We are the masters of segues.
At last count here, we have Ben Johnson leaving the Detroit Lions, the offensive coordinator. Pretty much everyone's number one candidate to be the next Sean McVay is going to be coaching the Chicago Bears. Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, looks like he's going to be the next head coach of the New York Jets. And, of course, one of the other candidates for the Cowboys job, or at least one of our candidates, Mike Vrabel, is going back to the New England Patriots. So those three jobs are off the market with some pretty coveted head coaches. It's not like they just hired some jerk from down the block. Those were all people who were quality candidates to be head coaches, and certainly would have been. I would have taken any one of the three, I think, to coach the Cowboys. And yet, Jerry dithers. And so at this point, David, give us a little bit of an update on what you think's going on at the Star.
Well, I think some of this speaks to, like I say, look, there's no assurance Ben Johnson will be the next Sean McVay whatsoever, but he is the hottest candidate in this cycle and really was last year as well. So for 2 years, the hottest guy in the cycle. Aaron Glenn, their defensive coordinator, also Mike Vrabel, a guy who's actually, had some success in the league. You know what he's about as a head coach, was arguably as a what from the standpoint of having a feel for what a guy could do as head coach, was probably the best active head coach in the market available at the time. And none of those candidates have talked to the Cowboys, which goes to, Troy Aikman, as he often does, because he can be rather blunt and just cut through things, said last week that while the Cowboys head coaching job is a high profile job, he doesn't necessarily believe it's a coveted job because of everything that comes with it and how you have to navigate the waters politically at the Star. And certainly when you go through the top names in the cycle and none of them interview with the Cowboys, you have to believe that there's something to that, right?
Yeah, you'd have to think so, right? I think it's a little embarrassing. Either way, why you wouldn't want to talk to Ben Johnson is beyond me. If you, whether you really wanted him to be a candidate for the job, one of the things that you get from these interviews when you talk to people is ideas. You find out, what are y'all doing with the Lions? What's up there? Why does that work so well? Give us some ideas about that. Why wouldn't you want to educate yourself about what other organizations are doing and getting some feel for that? And who knows when you
just as example, I think Ben Johnson will be the 13th candidate that Chicago has interviewed.
Yeah, well,
now, that's the other end of the spectrum, But yeah, that speaks to what you're talking about. It's like, why don't you get all of these views in, see what the thought is around the league, and then kind of sift through that and consolidate that, and kind of put the parameters of what you think the best way to go forward is. Now, look, Johnson could have agency in this too. Ben Johnson could say, "I'm really not interested. Thanks, Cowboys is flattering, but I'm not interested." But then that speaks to what Troy Aikman was saying, right? How could this franchise, for someone who has never been a head coach and is looking for their first job in the NFL, could find it not to be attractive?
I've got a theory on all that. And that just goes back to, it's not rocket science here, but this just, again, underscores for me that there was no plan here. The Cowboys didn't go into this with a list of desired candidates. They're putting their lists together on the fly, whereas the Bears knew what they were going to do. They knew the direction they want to go. And for me, the Patriots acted right within 24 hours of the end of the season. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. It doesn't seem to me like the Cowboy situation is targeted at all. And maybe that brings us to the topic of Deion, because I think, maybe, David, you can address this, right? Where does Jerry stand on Deion at this point? Was he a candidate at the start of this, and has he emerged as a candidate?
Well, the first known contact that Jerry made with anyone after him and Mike McCarthy split was a phone call to Deion. We do know that. There's been no formal interview. My belief is you really don't have a formal interview with Deion unless it's pretty close to a done deal, right? I don't believe Deion would put himself in the Colorado program in that position. I don't think Deion would ever put himself in the position of being, interviewing for something and being turned down. That doesn't fit into his persona and who he is. And people say, oh, well, all that's silly. Well, it's not silly. A lot of these guys, a lot of their leverage and clout comes from their perception. And so, like I said, I don't know that a sit-down interview, formal interview in and of itself is particularly necessary with Deion Sanders. Now, there'll be a lot of conversations to how you go about things, but both of these men know what they're about. They both know what's at stake if they make this move. I do find look, I think Jerry came into this league as a wildcatter, right? He came in with Jimmy Johnson, and was derided at the time because when he came in with Jimmy Johnson, successful college coaches, that didn't necessarily translate to successful NFL coaches. In fact, it usually did not. There was very little correlation. And you had, and there was a bias against college coaches at that time. That was an out-of-the-box, bold move by Jerry Jones when he came in. You could argue it was an even bolder move when he took a college coach who'd been sitting on his couch for 6 years to bring in after the acrimonious split with Jimmy Johnson. But now what do you have? Those are his two clearly most high-risk moves and they resulted in Super Bowl titles, and he's had none since. And I think Jerry wrestles with himself that he fancies himself as a risk taker, but he knows he's taken very few risks lately when it comes to the Cowboys, and that goes to the head coaching as well. He's gone more for stability, more middle of the road, and the three candidates they've interviewed so far, and I do believe they will add a fourth this week, Brian Schottenheimer, who I will also point out, like Kellen Moore, has never been a head coach. Those candidates are kind of down the middle, right? They're safe picks in a lot of ways. It's in some ways it's Jerry building a staff around a guy versus bringing a guy in to have him build the staff, which has been another approach he's taken. But again, I think Jerry's really wrestling with himself right now, and I think I do not dismiss the fact that he's sitting there going, okay, what do I want my legacy to be? How did I come into this league, and how am I going to go out? And do I want to go out being a completely different person that I felt I was going in? Well, no, this is a risk. Let's do it. Let's take it. And I think he's trying to reconcile and resolve that right now. But again, that's something you need to do before the search starts, not once it's underway, right?
Well, because all the candidates start disappearing off the market.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
They would have loved to have kept John Fossil, the special teams coordinator. And even when, after Tennessee made him an offer, Dallas was talking to him. He said, and they were going like, well, but we would like to keep you. And it's kind of like, well, how do you know that? Who's the coach? How do I know the coach is going to want to keep me? So, they're that's an example of a guy they would have liked to have kept in the building, and it's not going to happen now.
No, that's it kind of makes a mess for things. Now we've left out another candidate here, a guy that has been talked about and has said that he will not talk to anyone until after they've been eliminated, and that is Kliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders. And of course, we hadn't even gotten to that point either. That here it is. The Commanders and the Eagles are playing in the NFC Championship game. Half of the NFC East is in the NFC Championship game, and it does not include the Dallas Cowboys.
First time in 38 years.
But it does include the Dallas Cowboys former defensive coordinator and the Dallas Cowboys former offensive coordinator.
So this is a little bit, this has to add to the embarrassment factor for Jerry.
Sure.
The fact that this has happened, these kind of things are piling up on him. I don't know that I can recall, David, a time in the last, 25 years. There's been times when they've been bad. There were the Dave Campo years, of course, and that was awful. And
3 straight 5-11. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't guess there's anything worse than that. But from the standpoint that the record has been pretty good until this year, 7-10, but they were not winning in the playoffs, and now you've been surpassed by not only the Eagles but by the Commanders as well. The Commanders have a young quarterback who looks like he's going to be very good in this league, and that has to be frustrating. Frankly, you ought to be sending a thank you note to the Maras about the Giants, the fact that they continue to be as crummy as they have been now for more than a decade. All this has to weigh on him, to your point earlier.
Yeah, look, I know fans get frustrated with Jerry, but he is not a dumb man. He can read the tea leaves. He knows what's going on. He knows what the perception is. And that's part of the reason, in addition to getting the funding for a new stadium, on why he went with Bill Parcells, which was such a dramatic departure, which is really the only, since he went Jimmy and Barry, Bill Parcells is like the one move in that stretch where the one hire there where you go, okay, well, didn't see that coming. But it came because of all the other factors and where the franchise was, and he saw it as a fork in the road. The question would be whether Jerry sees this as a fork in the road. And, if Jerry makes the right hire here, this could be his last head coaching hire. If he doesn't, I think there'll be another one, but he's going to be 83 before the season reaches the midway point. This could be his final head coaching hire. And so I think he feels the weight of that as well. And it's just, do you return to your roots on who you feel you've always been at the end to kind of to bring like closure to your legacy, or do you settle into what you believe you've become through the years when you haven't had that success? And like I said, I really think this is what Jerry Jones is wrestling with at this moment, which is why I think Deion Sanders is still there. And here's the other one. We've seen publicly who they've interviewed, right? The three they've interviewed are Kellen Moore, and you've also
Leslie
had
Frazier.
Robert Saleh, and you've had Frazier. Now, you started this process off by tantalizing your fans with the possibility of Deion Sanders. Why would you do that and then interview these three candidates who are going to pale in comparison, even if they might be better candidates? Look, and I'm not dismissing that. Look, Deion is a flashy move. That would be the one that would give him some credibility and take some heat off of him. That doesn't mean it's the best move. I completely get that. I'm just talking about all the factors that Jerry Jones considers when he makes these moves, and looking at how he's progressed historically to reach decisions at certain junctures of his career with the Cowboys.
Yeah, well, let's just talk about those guys that they interviewed. None of them. We have Leslie Frazier's record, right, when he was the head coach of the Buckeyes. Not good. It didn't go well for him. Robert Saleh did not go well for him with the Jets. He's a terrific defensive coordinator. Leslie Frazier, another a good defensive mind as well. But those guys have track records. They might be short ones, but they have track records.
And to me, that speaks a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, and about, well, who wants this job and how attractive is it? I also find it very interesting that, once these names are public and people start discussing them, it's like, Robert Saleh isn't bad. I could see that. Can you imagine any other high-ranking team that brings in a coach with a record as bad as what Saleh had at the Jets, and the fan base is going, I could kind of see that. I think there's something there. And I know it's not a record, and he was dealing with a lot of other stuff. Look, I get all of the moving parts, and dumping all of that record on him is not fair. I get all of that. But again, a lot of sports is you're dealing in perception and the status of the moment. And for Robert Saleh to be, hey, he's as good as any candidate they've talked to out there, tells you a lot about how the Cowboys job is viewed, I believe.
I think one of the things we see when you talked about Jerry, wanting to be concerned about his legacy, which everybody should. Most of the time we've seen with these guys who've been real mavericks in the league, let's say Al Davis or Bud Adams, people who have had a prominent role, owners who've had prominent roles with the franchise and had records of, let's take Bud Adams. I grew up with that in Houston. He was hiring and firing coaches left and right. He barely got through 2 or 3 years with most of his coaches in the 60s. Some of them didn't even make a year. But the older he got, we saw something different happen to him. When he was in Tennessee, he had Fisher there, and he kept him way past what his shelf life should have been as coach of the Titans. And there was a feeling out there that, they start to mellow out a little bit, and they want to. They don't want to have to go through all of that. It's a lot of turmoil.
And that's what people were saying about Jerry and Jason Garrett, right? That was 9.5 years.
Sure. And so that was an example of that, how that was working at the time. And of course, it didn't work out, and he didn't do it, and he keeps going. I don't know, David, sometimes when you talk about that, and I think that's a reasonable point to make when you're 82 years old, and you're going to be 83 going into this next football season, that this could be your last hire. I also think it could be like he could have 5 more left.
He could have 2 to 3 more. Yeah. No, sure. That's completely legitimate.
He's not slowing down much.
It is an interesting, and you mentioned Bud Adams, and look, I don't think Al Davis changed much at the end, but Al Davis minimized himself and was just more of an irritant rather than a force in the league. Jerry, look, and I think you see this in every industry, and I know we touched on this a little bit before, where the revolutionary who comes in and changes how that industry views itself and how it goes about its business over time is absorbed as a part of that industry because that's the model that they see working, right? And so now suddenly they become more part of that industry and more mainstream. You know, they came in and they broke the model, got it in their image. And so now why would you still be taking those risks? Because you're comfortable with the model that you created. So I think there's some of that going on with Jerry as well. But a head coaching hire is a little different. And, you know, it's just interesting. I told this in the story I did today. I wrote going back to the 2014 draft when they're on the clock in the first round, and it's Zach Martin and Johnny Manziel. And Jerry was enamored with Johnny Manziel, as we all knew. Everyone else in the room wanted Zach Martin. So everyone said Zach Martin, and then Jerry's going, okay, let's talk about the quarterback a little more. Let's be sure on this. So they went down to the final minute when they're on the clock, and finally he knew everyone else wanted Zach Martin. Jerry wanted Johnny Manziel, so he turns to Steven. He's going, well, Steven, make the call. Steven said Zach Martin. So they took Zach Martin. Jerry leaned over to him, whispered in his ear, son, you'll never be special playing it down the middle. You just played it down the middle. That gives you a glimpse into how Jerry Jones looks at things. Now, look, I know a lot of people will step back and go, well, what the hell is he talking about? Zach Martin's going to be a Pro Bowl, he's going to be a Hall of Fame offensive lineman, and Johnny Manziel, just had a cup of coffee in the league. I get all that. But I do that story, I resurrect that story to show what his mindset is, what his core is. And at his core, it is, you got to take risks to be special. Those are the ones that really pay off.
Well, there's no question about that.
As we've seen, the downsides are greater too, right? But I think Jerry's one of those adrenaline junkies at heart, which is the higher the risk, the greater the fall. Put me in. That's what I've signed up for.
Well, I will say this. Whoever ends up with this job, and I got to tell you, I have no clue at this point. I'm not even sure with what's left on the market who's the best hire. And that is a sad thing. I do think that certainly Deion would give him the biggest jolt. There's no question about that. If he could have hired anybody he wanted, Deion would have given him the best jolt. So I don't dismiss that out of hand as a possibility for him to resurrect this thing. I do think that Jerry doesn't want to look like a fool. It doesn't want to look like he was left with, crummy choices, and that maybe he had something in mind all along, and this is just, he did this on his own time. It always reminds me of a guy that back in my pool playing days, and he was kind of an idiot. He wasn't one of our friends, but when he was playing, every once in a while you make a slop shot where a ball just rolls in a pocket, and he would like to act like he meant to do that all along. And I think this is
I was one of those guys playing pool, by the way, but sure, go ahead.
Yeah. That Jerry would do the same thing here at the end. But I guess we'll find out. This has been a really, I can't think of a time when there has been this protracted kind of problematic issue for Jerry. Because it started, right, with the all-in at the end of last year, and it proceeded all the way through this season.
Yeah.
And people have always been mad at Jerry, but not so much at this level. It had been ratcheted up to this level for this long a period of time.
And focused solely on him. And even look, we understand the injuries, but who did you give the coaching staff before the injuries? It doesn't matter who you hire here, unless you change the way you go about business, which is another thing that Jerry knows is out there. And so is this more motivation for him to do a Deion Sanders or a big splash hire like that he wouldn't do otherwise? And, there's still some veteran coaches out there who they haven't requested to speak to, and some college coaches out there they haven't requested to speak to. So this is interesting that so far, I think by the end of this week, they'll have 4 they will have talked to, and 2 of them have never been a head coach.
Has Pete Carroll talked to anybody?
He talked to a couple of clubs, but not to the Cowboys.
Yeah. You guys, I don't even know where to go with this, but again, Kevin just said something a minute ago that I think summed it all up, because it's basically indicated this is a tough spot for Jerry, or I don't know how Jerry deals with this. Once again, I mean,
he said it all emotion.
This is the fundamental issue with this whole team and this whole process is this head coaching search has become about Jerry. It's not about what's best for the Dallas Cowboys. It's about how Jerry comes out looking at the end of this. And that is the fundamental breakdown with this team. And I fear that if the owner, we can talk all about the owner's legacy and the owner wanting this and the owner wanting that, but if he hasn't learned that at 83 years old, he's not going to learn it. And I don't know that this process may end up resulting with a head coach who wins a Super Bowl for the Cowboys. I don't think that anybody can look at the steps of this process and how they have played out and said, this is a well-designed process.
Well, and here's the thing. No matter what happens and who he ends up with, he's going to try to sell it that way, though, right? I mean, that's the thing about Jerry. He'll be as excited about whoever he hires as if he had gotten the guy who'd won 4 Super Bowls.
Yeah, but people aren't going to listen to that message. If it's truly a high profile person, you can sell that. But if you go through this process and it's Brian Schottenheimer or Kellen Moore, you can't sell that to the fans, I don't think.
No, well, he certainly can't sell Brian Schottenheimer. That just seems like when that came up as the betting favorite the other day. Vegas was putting him down as the best odds to be the next Cowboys coach. Of course, that's not a scientific thing in any sense. It just shows.
No, since he had no odds last week when they started doing it, but yeah.
Well, that's right. It was that shows you where the gamblers are going with, just because it's somebody that Jerry knows.
Just a name, yeah, because there's a vacuum of information right now, you know.
Yeah.
What's the best move they could? Let's cut to the chase here. Each one of you. What is the best move they could make at this point for the long-term health of the Cowboys?
I don't think there's anything that's for the long-term health of the Cowboys. Who knows what that is? I would say that the move that he could make that would make the biggest splash clearly is Deion. That's a bigger hire than Ben Johnson. That's a bigger hire than Mike Vrabel. That is the biggest hire he could make at this point, of a guy who could come. The players would like him, and he would. He's got a lot of charisma, and the problem then would be, what kind of staff does he assemble around him? You know, because Deion has made it clear, even when at Colorado, he has worked really hard to hire the best staff he could. He has a lot of respect for coaches and what they've done. He knows what his shortcomings are as a coach, and he tries to surround himself with the best people. I believe it's one of the reasons why Deion is every time he plays someone, he goes on and on about the other coach and about what a great job he does. I've never heard any other head coach speak as glowingly of his opposing coach as Deion does. I think it's because he's trying to build as many bridges as he can to these people, and who knows what he'll need down the line, which is smart. You know, if that's not one of your strong points and that's what you need to do, well, he's doing it.
You know, it's yeah. I mean, that would be the big. But again, we've talked. You know, Pete Carroll and John Gruden. I still think there's something there as far as presence and guys who've done it. Different issues to work through. I get it, but and there are, you know, some college coaches out there that I think would pique some interest. But the fact that the Cowboys haven't made those requests yet seems, again, it leads you to believe they're either playing the long game with. It leads you to believe they either set this in motion with Deion, because what have we not heard from both sides since it became very clear in the first few hours that they contacted each other? Nothing, right? Deion doesn't have an extension. He doesn't have more NIL money, to my knowledge, at this point. And the Cowboys have interviewed a few guys, but, you know, so I mean, it's, you know, was this just get it out there publicly to get some things moving, to see how Colorado would respond, to see if there's a possibility? I don't know. You know, maybe that's playing out. The other would be that, well, they really did like a Kingsbury and think that he made a lot of sense. And, well, certainly he'll be out by the second round. We could talk to him this week. oh, wait, they're in the NFC Championship game. We're going to have to wait at least another week to talk to him. So, unless their head coach is still out there in the postseason among these four teams, it is a little puzzling how they've gone about it and who you would latch on to now.
Yeah, it's a mess, and I guess we're just getting used to it around here, and what Jerry's planning to do. And I'm going back to what Evan said at the very beginning, which was that he clearly had in his mind all along the reason why he didn't give Mike McCarthy an extension going into the season was that he wanted to wait to see what happened. Well, if you're going to wait to see what happens, then you need to be prepared to do something else. Yeah. You have to have a plan in place. That's clearly what the Patriots did, right? I think that they had Jared Mayo on the shortest leash possible going into the season. Why they didn't give that job to Mike Vrabel in the first place, last year, I don't know. That didn't make any sense to me at all. He was the most obvious and logical choice, a great linebacker for Bill Belichick there in New England. And he did a really good job in Tennessee with limited talent on that team. And now they do that, but at least they had a plan. Obviously, that was the deal they were going to do all along. Jerry didn't have anything going on. He was just kind of flying by the seat of his pants, which I think kind of describes Jerry a little bit. I don't think he's a deep thinker. I don't think he's the kind of person who has plans in place. I think he is impulsive, does what he wants to do when he wants to do it, and tries to feel what is the best thing to do instead of looking and studying it. People ask me all the time, well, what's going to be any different when Jerry's gone and Steven's in charge? And I think, there are a lot of differences between Jerry and Steven. And I think one of the ones you just pointed out, David, was what in the old Johnny Manziel story is that, Steven went with the scouts all along on that. That this is who we've studied. This is what we've looked at. And Zach Martin is clearly the guy to take here. And that wasn't a deal about, as Jerry always characterized it, hitting it down the middle. That's not what it was at all. Is that this guy is a really good player, and he's going to be a good player for a long time. He ends up being a Hall of Famer. And Johnny Manziel, there were a lot of people knew a lot of things about Johnny going in. It wasn't just that Johnny was a little guy who didn't have a great arm. It's the fact that Johnny had some discipline he had off the field problems. Yeah. He didn't study. He was not a guy who prepared himself. Looking back on all that, we can talk about what Mike Evans actually meant to him as a quarterback because he was such a great receiver. There were a lot of issues for Johnny besides the question of, can this little guy make it in the NFL? It was way past that. And so Jerry was not willing to look at all that. He's just not a deep thinker about these kinds of things. He just likes to. I think Jerry pretty much is what he seems to be. What we've seen of Jerry all along is pretty much who he is. I think he certainly does react to things well from the financial side, and he understands that very well. I think he's very instinctive and intuitive about all of that. He is not instinctive and intuitive about football.
You had, from the time you fell to 3-5, you had 10 weeks to put together a contingency list of that. And that should have been Jerry's first priority as GM or as owner. One of the two personalities should have spent the next 10 weeks putting together a contingency, and somebody else should have been trying to fix this season. And the fact that didn't happen has put the Cowboys behind on this cycle again. Now, that doesn't rule out that look, I don't put anything past Deion. As I've said, look, I've watched the guy since he played college. I don't put anything past Deion. I have no idea if he's the right guy for this job or not, but I do not doubt that Deion Sanders could come in here and make an impact. I don't know if Kellen Moore is the right guy. I think to David's point, Kellen Moore and Brian Schottenheimer wouldn't fire up any fans. But the bottom line here is we're just looking at a guy casting about at this point in time. There was no definitive plan, and I think that has put the Cowboys behind the cycle on a number of fronts. Not the least of which, David, right, will be then assembling a staff after that.
I agree, yeah, and that's the biggest. Yeah, like we said, they already lost Fossil, a guy they would have liked to captain. Whoever the head coach in here was there was a good chance he would have wanted John Fossil because of what he's accomplished in this league.
Cowboys don't need any more fossils. The Cowboys are a fossil of an organization.
Well, that's the thing too about all this is that you interview a lot of these guys, like a Robert Saleh. I don't think Robert Saleh is getting a job as a head coach this year. Nobody's going to hire him as a head coach, but I'd love to have him as my defensive coordinator. That's another reason to bring these guys in to talk to them is to see who you might want to hire to be one of your coordinators. That's part of the process of all that. Of interviewing
Dallas has done that quite a bit. And that's the other part. If you're not getting the high profile or the name head coach, the other approach, and we've seen Jerry take this before, is, okay, let's assemble this whole staff. Saleh would be a great fit as defensive coordinator here. So let's pair him with Kellen Moore or Brian Schottenheimer, and they feel good about each other, and you just go, So I think Jerry is clearly working along two different tracks here. It's going to be interesting to see which track he takes.
Yeah, we'll see. Not going so well so far. It's like I think the tracks are heading toward each other. It's what it looks like right now. All right. That's going to do it for the Cowboys segment of our podcast today, or the Jerry Jones segment of our podcast today.
That wasn't a segment. That was a whole podcast.
Well, that's pretty much.
At Texas Capital, we know that the path to greatness isn't for the faint of heart. It's full of chances and opportunities with no promises. We know because we help clients and communities achieve greatness every day. Texas Capital is a full-service financial services firm founded and headquartered in Dallas, Texas. Our customized solutions were built to keep your business moving forward. Please visit texascapital.com to learn more. That's texascapital.com. Texas Capital is the collective brand name for the Texas Capital Bank and its separate non-affiliate banks and wholly owned subsidiaries. For deposit products, member FDIC.
But we got some other things to talk about here. We've got some stuff we need to talk about with the Rangers. We got stuff to talk about the national championship game last night. Ohio State beat Notre Dame. That game started out kind of gangbusters for Ohio State. It looked like they were just going to run away with it.
Gangbusters for Notre Dame. Notre Dame marched down the field and scored first, right?
Well, they did, but at one drive, and then they kind of went in the tank after that. Ohio State is the better team. There's no question about that. I think Ohio State's the best team in the country, and I don't think there's any question about that. I think there's a question about how they go about their business. They're a funny team to watch. They started out great against Texas in the Cotton Bowl. Just went right down the field on them. Texas just looked like, they're not going to be able to stop them at all. It was pretty much the same thing that happened, in the Notre Dame game, in the championship game. And then after that, Texas really put the screws to Ohio State. Jeremiah Smith caught one pass for 3 yards, and they did a great job against them from that point on. I think that the Buckeyes have a lot of talent. They didn't always do a great job with it, as fans will tell you in that Michigan game. But they are a really good team and a worthy champion. I think they did a good job at coming back. I think that
you win 4 playoff, Kevin. You win 4 playoff games. You're a worthy champion, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody can make their arguments that they didn't win their conference, that they didn't play in the conference championship, but they've won 4 playoff games. The last 3 of which were, they had a home playoff game, but the last 3 of which were obviously in neutral sites. They're a worthy champion. There's no way around saying that, and giving Ohio State credit. I think I went through this last night. I think Ohio State, more than any other team, I don't think there's a situation in which I would ever want to see Ohio State win. It does not matter the opponent. I don't ever want to see Ohio State win. And you've got to give them credit.
Because of their fans or because of the school?
I probably both. I mean, I don't know much about the school, but I do know the fan base, and I do know the there's some arrogance there. I just feel like Texas had a chance to make a play to win the game, right? They had a chance to tie that game with 2 minutes left. They were first and goal at the 1 yard line. Notre Dame had a chance last night to come back, an unheard of comeback, and make a stop on 3rd and 11 or whatever it was. And Ohio State completed that long pass. So they were a worthy champion. It's an end of story.
Yeah, they were. And And, I don't buy the argument either. And Tim Cowshaw made this argument that, well, your team gets hot at the end here. And so were they really the better team? Because they wouldn't have made the tournament, right? Under the 14 format. Neither would Notre Dame. I don't buy that. In football, I don't buy the thing about a team getting hot. You just play up to what you are. These games are a week apart, different opponents. I don't buy that. I think that Ohio State needed some time to put itself together, and the Buckeyes finally did that. And, you cannot do what they did to Oregon and then, in Tennessee the week before that, and not say that this is a really great team. I think that and I do think that the fact that Texas played them so close, that ended up being a 14-point game, it was much closer than that, it tells you why that going into next season, that Texas is the favorite to win it all in most odds makers' minds. And I think that's an accurate reflection of the fact that Arch Manning will be the starting quarterback officially. And I think he does give them some elements that Quinn Ewers did not, namely the fact that he runs so well. He also has a terrific arm. He's a much bigger kid, bigger frame. I think he can probably, we'll see, he could probably absorb a little more punishment than Quinn Ewers could. And that gives them some room a little bit in their offense to do some different things as well.
But Kevin, one question on Texas, right? And what you just said is, in your mind, is Texas the early favorite simply because of Arch Manning, or does Texas have the team to support where Arch Manning will make them great?
Well, I was getting to that. They had the number one recruiting class in the country, and so we'll see. They're going to lose a few players. They're going to lose most of their offensive line. I thought it was an overrated offensive line, and how you can do that with 2 number one draft picks in it, I'm not sure. And a center who started in, I think, 57 games. But that was not a good run blocking line. They were good pass blockers, not good run blockers. I do think that Kelvin Banks, the left tackle, it's funny to say that because I think he's probably a good pick for the Cowboys at 12. He only gave up 2 sacks in 4 years at Texas. He's not a great run blocker, but I think if you're a good pass blocker, you can be a good run blocker. It requires you to have good feet to be a good pass blocker, and he does clearly have that. I think that he could solve a lot of the Cowboys' problems in their offensive line if he was at left tackle. So I do think that Texas has everything it needs to really compete next year. They're going to need to fill in a little bit at wide receiver. They have some guys that they like. They're younger players. They had a lot of depth on that team. And that's the thing that I think will really help them as well. They had a lot of running backs, and they'll be getting back C.J. Baxter, who was a 5-star running back who did not play at all last year. So I think that they have the potential to live up to what everybody expects of them. We'll see. I think if you look around in the SEC and you look around everybody else, there are not a lot of, as we know of them now, great quarterback prospects out there. This was not a great class of quarterbacks in college football, but at least we knew who they were. This coming year, those names are still to be made. We'll see who it is. It's going to be really good. We don't know at this point who that's going to be, but we'll see. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Mavericks, David. They are struggling, as we would expect them to do, without Luka Doncic and without Kyrie Irving at times. He is playing some, but that bulging disc has been a problem for him. But I always contend that these kind of things are actually probably good for teams. It makes it makes other players, step up, take bigger roles. You get to see what they can do, and then it gives your stars a little bit of rest as you go into the long grind of the playoffs. But having said all that, as we know now, Luka Doncic is will no longer be eligible to be MVP because he won't have played enough games. And I never like to question injuries of players. We just don't know what's going on with them, and I'm just loath to do that and say that this guy's soft or whatever about anybody. I don't think that anybody would say that Luka Doncic is soft. He's a very tough kid and plays very hard. I do think that, there have been questions about his conditioning in the entire time he has been with the franchise. And even though he has a body team, as they call it, to look after him, there remain questions about how committed he is to that. And because of it, how much that has made him susceptible or vulnerable to the types of injuries that he's had. So I want to get some of your thoughts about that, David, and what is the legacy that Luka Doncic is making for himself here in Dallas?
Well, I agree with you completely on injuries. That's a very delicate topic because I don't think I think athletes rarely use injuries as an excuse not to perform. I really do. Now, that being said, I think some people have injury. Some athletes have injuries because their style of play goes beyond what their body can absorb, right? If you want to toss it back on the Cowboys, I would put Sean Lee in that category, the Cowboys linebacker. He dealt with injuries throughout his career because he was playing a game beyond what his body was built to play. And you see that in all sports with some athletes. They just, their effort and their drive takes them outside of what their bodies can stand. And so you have injuries because of it. But I think also there is, and with Luka Doncic, let's bring up Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley was a guy who had some injuries and didn't have the conditioning of like a Jordan and some of the other guys. And during that time, while he was still an elite player, you heard whispers and people would point to, yeah, but if he just, if he put in the work on the conditioning this much, if he just redefined his body a little bit, if he just did that, if he just did this. And, Barkley heard that criticism, as he often does. He took it head on, and he was basically like, look, I get a spark and a joy from playing this game, the game itself. I'm not sure that same spark would be there if I had to do everything, to this level on the outside to still play the way that I play. So I could be better conditioned, but be lesser of a player because of my joy diminishing because of everything else I have to put in to do it. And very rarely do you hear an athlete, I think, be that open with that concept. And you just, I just wonder if there's a little bit of that to Luka because he plays the game with a spirit and in a way that really no one else plays it at the moment. The creativity, sometimes too, it's like people, they'll go on and creative people sometimes don't want to rehearse things. They want it to be spontaneous. They want that the creative juices flowing and responding in the moment that you don't get with practice necessarily. And so, but I also think some of that's a cop-out too. You can find a happy medium. You can increase your conditioning and still keep the joy and the passion of the game. And I think now, because what we've seen what Luka can be and what he has done, he is held to a different standard. And once you're held to a different standard, well, what do you need to do to take the next step? And I think a lot of people close to Luka would argue, well, this is what you need to do to take the next step and really elevate yourself to one of the top 10 players who has ever played this game. Are you willing to make that step? And it'll be interesting to see if the prolonged absence with his injury will alter his conditioning approach at all in the offseason.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that, we've heard, at times, what about if the Mavericks acquire LeBron James, and obviously that would change everything about the franchise and what they're trying to do. To me, the hidden element of that would be so great is that the example you would hope would be so great. You would hope that of all people, no one has worked harder to keep themselves fit than LeBron James. As great an athlete as he is, as great as a physical specimen as he has worked tremendously hard. And that's why he's still playing at 40 and playing at the level that he is. And to me, that's the difference. Kyrie Irving comes in, and he's a great player, right? he's not going to tell Luka any of that kind of stuff. That's not his style. He's not going to say to Luka, man, you need to be working out. LeBron would do that, I believe. And I think that has to happen at some point. Luka has to realize that, when you're young and you're a little bit indomitable and you've played this game since you were 14 against men and you have dominated them, I think you start to think that you're invincible.
You're telling me I need to do it a different way? Who are you to tell me I need to do it a different way?
I think that
and also, and look, all these guys work hard because you can tell Luka you need to work harder, and he's going, what are you talking about? I work my butt off in the off season, and he does. But does he work out to the level that a LeBron James does, that some of these others who have extended their career does? And that's what, there are degrees to that. And that's what I think a lot of times, unless a younger athlete sees that and sees the time that some of these other great players put into it, it doesn't fully register with them. They just see the result, but they don't see all of the time in the lab, as they like to say, that got them there.
Yeah, but I think too, and part of the problem with Luke, he may be doing it in the offseason. I don't know that he's doing it during the season. There's a maintenance part of it, right? You don't do all the weightlifting and all the rest of it that you do in the regular season, but you still do certain things to keep up and to make sure that that's the case. So we'll see what he's able to put together. If he comes back, and is really does a great job, it won't matter to anybody. They'll see that that he has done the same thing that he's always done, and maybe that's good enough. But if you go back and look, I think in his career, I believe he's only played as many as 70 games once, and he's not going to even make 60 probably this year. So that's a lot of games for people to be missing when you're 25 years old. And
there's time here for this team to come together. I mean, look at what they did with the moves they made at the deadline last year and coming together. And that being said, they're pretty deep in the seeds here. They can't afford to lose too many more games here and lose ground.
They can't. I will say it's remarkable
put themselves in a position. Yeah,
to watch them come back and beat Oklahoma City, the best team in the league. They beat them twice. The only team in the league that's beaten them twice, which tells you a little bit about the Mavericks as well, right? Mm-hmm. A great team. If you're a great team, you dig a little deeper when you're playing against another great team. And they did that against the Thunder. That was very impressive, what they did against them. And maybe they've gotten in the Thunder's head a little bit. All right, Evan, wrap us up a little bit with the Rangers and what you think about everything that's going on now. Give us a thought. Tell us where they're going to finish. Are they going to make the World Series or not? Bruce Bochy's going to come back past next year. Kumar Rocker is going to be in the rotation. Jack Lauder's going to be in the rotation. What's the lineup's going to be? If you could do that in the next 90 seconds, that'd be great.
Well, they're not going to bring Kirby Yates back. He just agreed to a deal with the Dodgers. Shocker.
Oh, did he really? I did not see that.
So the Dodgers have now signed, I think, 3 closer quality pitchers in Blake Trinan, Kirby Yates, and Tanner Scott. So the Rangers do not have a guy with an experienced track record of closing. The Dodgers do have a payroll that with tax is probably going to approach $500 million. And we're going to hear lots of screams about how baseball is dying and what the Dodgers are doing is illegal. Look, I think there's going to be a price to pay for the Dodgers somewhere along the line because there's so much deferred money. And at some point in time, the revenues that come with Shohei Ohtani and all of that will start to dissipate. But the Dodgers are trying to maximize their window on a world championship dynasty. That's what they're trying to do. And I think that for most fans, it's just envy more than anything else. As far as the Rangers are concerned, they've done a lot of work on the bullpen. I think if they need to, they can address the bullpen in season. But right now, it's going to be kind of an open competition for a closer unless they go out and sign another arm. And I just don't know who's out there that would be attractive. I think the one other thing that we need to mention here is since last week, the Rangers streaming deal was announced, and I cannot tell you how difficult it is to try to explain to fans this whole situation, but let's try to wrap it up here very quickly. The Rangers announced a streaming deal with Victory Plus. Victory Plus broadcasts the Stars on streaming. That is free to fans. It will not be free if you stream the Rangers you will be asked to pay $100. It does not, however, mean that you will necessarily have to pay $100 for the Rangers. They are still in the process of negotiating linear TV rights with cable/satellite providers, i.e. DirecTV, your local cable company, so forth and so on. And so once they get those deals done, you may have the option of being able to watch the Rangers on your local cable channel. What this Victory Plus app should do is give everybody in their 5-state viewing area, if they're not a cable subscriber, they should have a direct to consumer streaming option. If for some reason, as Bally did last year, couldn't get on a number of cable channels, people will still have a streaming option. This is not about exacting more money out of fans per se. It's about giving them a fail-safe to allow people who last year could not get the team if they weren't tied to a terrestrial/linear cable company that had a deal with Bally/Diamond Sports Group. This is about being able to expand reach at this point in time.
Wow, that was really good. Right down.
I had to step away for a second. Could you repeat that?
Not if my life depended on it. It's like it was like in Spain. You know, I had rehearsed it all and I was able to get it out. But if anybody asked me a follow-up question, I would be like, got nothing for you.
A lot of slashing in there. Well, it's all very confusing, all that TV stuff. I will say this: that one thing about the Dodgers and all the money they spend, we're kind of like we're one removed from that whole Dodger ownership thing. He's got a lot of money, and they spend it. And I don't begrudge them that at all. If they want to spend $1 billion, let them spend $1 billion. What the heck? Go get you an owner of your own who's going to spend that kind of money is what I say.
I mean, I think the only question here would be, look, the Dodgers are putting a lot of deferred money out there. And at some point in time, they're not going to have the same revenues that they have with Shohei Ohtani in the prime of his career. And they may still have to, I think they've got over $1 billion at this point in time in deferred money and interest. And at some point in time, if you're not able to service that, you're either going to have to sell the team or Major League Baseball is going to have to step in. But I don't think we're anywhere close to that at this point in time. The Dodger ownership at present, which includes Mark Walter and some Dallas folks, they're willing to write the checks, and they have the ability to continue to expand and service the debt that they've got. So they're willing to do it. And I think every fan in baseball should basically be saying, boy, I wish my ownership group would do that. But I will also say this, and I know David wants to say something. All I'll say is it improves the Dodgers' chances a whole lot. But we went through this in the 90s and the 80s with the Yankees and in 2000 with the Yankees. And the Yankees signed all those guys when they got Alex and Jason Giambi and all of that. And how many World Series have they won in the last 25 years? One.
Yeah.
Yeah, and right now at this level, it's not sustainable, but these guys know when the exit ramp is and when they have to start tapering off to get it to a manageable level to where they're not going to have to sell the franchise, right? So, I mean, it's that they're operating at a level of looking forward that we're not acquainted with because we don't have the books and the knowledge.
And they are using those 3 Japanese players as a great revenue engine to capitalize on a market that other clubs just can't capitalize
into another
on.
market to establish themselves there, where they become a legacy team in that market, even when they're not competitively high in the standings as they are right now.
Mark Walter didn't run out of money anytime soon.
Kind of like the Cowboys.
Yeah. Jerry might, but not Mark. All right, that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We thank you for listening in with us. So we hope you'll come back next week. Maybe the Cowboys will even have a head coach by next week. But David once again laughs. No coach for the Cowboys yet. All right, so from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.